I just got 2 quilts back from the Longarmer, and I'm making this video not because I'm trying to put anybody out of business or do any damage to their reputation, because I'm not going to be naming names or anything, but I just thought it would be helpful for especially beginning sewers or young people who don't have that much experience with this type of thing, to know what to look for. And I learned a very time-consuming lesson on this, and I might be able to help somebody avoid this problem. So I got these back. Some people in my area have opened a quilt shop with fabric and little gifts and all kinds of nice things, and it's very pretty on the inside. And they have a long arms machine in the shop, and that's one of the services that they offer. They offer classes on quilting, and they also offer the service of long arm quilting. But the quality of the workmanship is such that it bears showing to somebody to see what can happen and how to avoid it. So this is called a scrappy quilt because it has nothing to do with the quality of the piecing or anything. It's just that something that you use a bunch of leftover scraps for is called a scrappy quilt. And so just by this one's nature, it's all geometric pieces. So what happened when I brought it home and started applying the binding to one corner, I really hadn't spread it out and looked at it real close, but I should have while I was still in the shop. And I have to say, too, that the lady was real nice about refunding my money and she even offered to rip the stitches out of it, but with the quality of the stitching that she did, or whoever did, I'm not sure if she did it or if somebody else did it, I didn't want her to be picking stitches out of this and then have a bunch of holes in the quilt when I got it back. So I decided to pick out the stitching myself, and so that's what I'm about to do. But I wanted to make this video and show you this before I did that. After I get this picked out and requilted by someone who has more experience, then I'll bring that back to you and show you what we did on this. Okay, so all these pieces are squares and triangles. It's all very geometric, strips and so forth. The quilter, the Longarmer, used a very geometric design on the back of this. Well, you can see the pattern better on the back of it than you can on the front. Let me get my camera. There we go. So it has a very geometric design here, and then there's this border that's very intense along the edge. And I say it's intense because visually it has more weight. This has more weight than this does, and so it looks odd. To me, it's off balance. It draws attention to the edge, and on a small quilt, you probably don't want to do that. And here I'm just going to pick this apart. The motif on this edge is different size than the motif along here. This is smaller, this is larger, and this corner doesn't look too bad, but let me show you. This corner is a disaster. This corner has small motifs, even smaller than this. So this isn't even the same size as this from one side of it to the other. And then this is larger than all of them. the corner doesn't transition because these are they're not even lined up at all. And that's just me being picky. But if you're going to draw that much attention to the border, it needs to be good. The other thing that happened on here with a beginning person is that the quilt wasn't stretched. You know, on a long arm quilting machine, there are clamps that hold the fabric tight for each row that is quilted. From side to side, there are these clamps that you just attach it to this fabric and it pulls it tight so that this kind of thing doesn't happen. So when you have wrinkling and puckering like this, that means that this line is not going to be straight because you got less wrinkling down here, so this line is going to be out here further, and then you get up here and this line is going to go in because that's where all this puckering happens. So what I noticed when I got home and I started putting the binding on, I don't know which corner, I think it might have been this corner that I tried first, and I couldn't get the corner square because the puckering, so it didn't look too bad up here, and then I get down here and there's more and more puckering, and so the edge of the quilt went in there. So that means that whole edge wouldn't be square, and it would make this corner look like it had been stretched out that way, which is what I was having a problem with. So I got to looking and realized how crooked these lines are, and I think most quilters, most long armers especially, know better than to put a geometric stitching design on top of something that's as geometric and straight and that has lines on it like this one does. I mean, there are lines that go this way and lines that go not so much this way, but this definitely here, this corner of this Greek key starts out over here and it gets smaller up here, and in some places the stitching goes up over, here's one, the stitching goes from, say, down here to up on top of this border. So if you're going to treat this like a border, it needs to be a border. If you're selecting patterns to put on something that's definitely geometric, and most quilts are geometric, don't put a geometric stitching pattern on it, because on the top side you're going to have problems. It's just going, this pattern of stitching, of quilting, fights with the pattern that's created by all these little squares and strips. So that's a no-no to begin with. The other no-no is you should never put a border on a small quilt. It should go edge to edge, and if you do use a border, it shouldn't overpower what you've done on the interior. So this visually weighs more than what's in here. If that makes any sense to you, this is very intense, very close stitching, and I think part of me wants to say this person probably did the border before they did the interior of the quilt, which is also something that this whole business could have been avoided if the border had been done last. And I'm only guessing at what was done based on what I see here. So no geometric patterns on top of geometric piecing. Geometric patterns are good for comforters and things that are made out of solid pieces of fabric that don't have this much intense changing in here. This is pretty busy, you might say. So don't put something that you can't square up. You know, this would be fine on a great big comforter or something. So, let's see, let me look at my notes here. So we're talking about visual weight on the border. If you do some kind of a border, whether it's a big quilt or a small quilt, if you draw attention to this, it should be perfect. I mean, the first thing I noticed was this design here. And then I noticed that these are larger than these and that the corners don't work very well. And so that tells me that the person that did this and measured this on the machine didn't gauge this very well to have this. And you know, you could go right up to here and keep those all within these two seam lines, and then go here and then come back and just do a little circular squirrely thing right there, if you don't know how to transition the corners. Or you could measure from here to there, but it all needs to be the same size. It doesn't smoothly transition from one thing to another. An all-over design that was organic and kind of squirrely, or swirly, as I call it, squirrely. Something that didn't have a particular angular thing that would be drawing your attention, and you're going, oh, well, that's crooked, and that's crooked, and that's crooked, and this is puckered, and so forth. If you have an all-over design that is swirly, and you have stretched your fabric properly with the clamps that are on your long arm machine, a swirly pattern would just ignore all of those angles and things and just be there, and it wouldn't be grabbing our attention. You should never do the border first. The border is the last thing to do on a machine quilt. So it's obvious that this quilt was not loaded onto the machine properly. It's possible that the person did not have all the equipment they needed for doing this. It's possible that the back and the front were not loaded onto separate rails. And there's no evidence that any kind of clamp was used to hold the fabric taut. It's puckered in both directions. Like you can see the puckering here. This isn't too bad on this part. This one is worse. You've just got fabric that's just floating around there, and there's no evidence that this was pulled tight with a clamp. So because of that, you would never be able to get your corner square or your sides straight. And so you would never place if you entered a competition with this quilt. And for some of us, it would be kind of embarrassing to present this to somebody, even as a gift, like it is. So, okay, let me go to the next quilt. So what the Longarmer did, again, another border. And this border doesn't relate at all to what's in here. So we on our design, on our quilting pattern design, we have a big square here, we got a big square over here, and these come together and make a big square area right here. But why not put that design right here too? They missed a huge opportunity and left large areas unquilted. So this person then stitched it in the ditch, tried to. If you can't sew a straight line, don't try to stitch in the ditch. And if you can't hit the ditch, don't do it. This looks really bad. This is very bad. This is very amateurish and pathetic, frankly. And here are some more stitches that are just wavy lines, and they sort of follow the piecing, but not much. And there just doesn't seem to be, well, even if it was invisible thread or matching thread, but this is just awful. This is on the line, off the line, on, off, on, off, on, off. Very, very amateurish. Let me lift this up. This looks like something that, I mean, the looseness of the fabric and the lack of attention to detail here is just sad. And I'm gonna have to pick all of this out, because this, when you take your quilt to a longarmer, you do it and you're willing to spend the $80 or $90 or $100 that it costs to do it. You're willing to spend that money because you want your quilt to look better, not worse. And there are huge areas that are just not quilted. And it just looks like to me that the person did all this ditch stitching in order to call it quilted. And it's very possible that she doesn't even own any computerized patterns that would allow her to do an all-over design. I would have found that out had I asked more questions and not just assumed, because they opened a quilt shop and offered this long-arm quilting as a service. And I should have asked more questions. I should have said, well, let's look at some of the designs you have. And can I see something that you actually quilted, that you actually did yourself recently and on this machine? And I probably also should have asked her, do you just take this work in and farm it out to somebody, or do you do it in shop yourself? Because you always want to be able to talk to the quilter, the one who's actually going to do it. And most of them should be able to see the quality of the piecing and the craftsmanship of the piecing. Now, there's no accounting for taste and what people put together, and in my case that's true too, but the work is always neat and the points are always lined up, and so my craftsmanship is very good regardless of the colors and so forth and so on, or the taste. And so that's what you expect from a long armor. The best long arm work is tight, it's flat, it has trimmed threads, there are no skip stitches, and on this, there are just threads everywhere on it. On the back side, there are bird nests where the bobbin thread got all screwed up and skipped a bunch of stitches from one place to the next. And it's just, see, here's a place where there's a little problem with the bobbin thread, and it wasn't remedied. Here's some. And on a long arm machine, there's a way to pull the bobbin thread up through to the top and trim it without, you don't have to take it off of the machine and then trim both sides. So it's not as time consuming as probably you might think. It's probably, then here's a little bird nest right here where the bobbin thread got all screwed up, and they just left that there. So this is just where there are stitches missing, and that's just awful. You just shouldn't. Here's another bird nest from the machine not working properly. Here's another little bird nest right there. So this you know, good long arm work is tight, it's flat, it's trimmed. There are no skip stitches. There's no bobbin tangles on the back. There's no machine oil on the fabric, which I do have on this one. So this looks like a real homemade piece of quilting, and I'm not being very flattering when I say homemade, because there's a difference between homemade and handmade, and this does not look handmade, and it doesn't look like a professional job of quilting either. This is the quilt that I took all of the stitching out of and had it redone by a different quilter, Longarm Quilter. And this, it's just, I can't believe the difference. I just can't believe the difference. It's just, I'm speechless. I'm so pleased with this. The fabric is stretched. It was obviously stretched on the machine when it was loaded, and so we don't have that heavy, inappropriate border on this sash that's around the edges. So you have edge-to-edge design. And look at the back. You just shouldn't have just huge puckers when you have something done on a long arm, because theoretically it's supposed to all be smoothed out and flat when the stitching happens on it. So I'm gonna take this one off and show you the other one. So this is also an edge-to-edge design. I don't have the binding on this one yet, but this one also had a very inappropriate pattern done on the sashing around the edge, and it just was, it kind of competed with the design of the quilt itself with the piecing. And so I don't want my stitching to be the major feature of my quilting, but that before was so bad that it did take away from the piecing. It was just a horrible situation. It took me 6 days and 6 nights, evenings, to pick out all the stitches, because some of the stitches were stacked. Some of them, there was bird nests on them. I mean, I probably already went into all this, but it's good now because I took it to an experienced long armor, and she did a beautiful job. This is a happy little quilt, and so I put and the other thing, the original quilter ruined the backing that I had on this quilt originally. The needle was so dull in the machine that as the needle pushed through to the backing fabric, it snagged it. And here, I'll show you. This was the original fabric that I had on the backing for the backing of this quilt that I'm showing you right here. The needle was dull in this person's machine, and let me get a close up there. See those white lines on that fabric? And right here there's some pulls where the needle came through it and snagged the threads and made little pull places. And even if I could take a nitpicker and pull that to the other side, I would still have all these white lines.